Many English learners struggle with unreal sentences. But what does unreal actually mean? Unreal means something that is not real, something imagined, something hypothetical, something that did not happen. We use unreal sentences to talk about dreams, regrets, and situations that are different from reality. For example, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the exam. But in reality, you didn't study and you didn't pass. Or you can say, if I were you, I would take that opportunity. This is also not real. It's advice, imagination. Now let's talk about how to make an unreal sentence. To form an unreal sentence, you need two parts: the if clause and the result clause. The if clause describes the unreal situation, and the result clause shows what would happen. For present unreal situations, we use if plus past form, would plus base verb. For example, if I were more confident, I would speak fluently. In this video, we will focus on present unreal sentences. Now that you understand the structure, let's move to practice. You will hear a sentence, listen carefully, and then repeat. Pay attention to your pronunciation, your tone, and your confidence. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video and practice at your own pace.
If the CEO of the company were more visionary, the organization would achieve faster growth. If modern education systems were more practical, students would develop real-world skills more effectively. If the streets of this city were less crowded, daily life would feel much more peaceful. If social media platforms were used more responsibly, society would experience fewer distractions. If this old laptop were faster, completing my work would become much easier. If experienced teachers were more widely available, learning outcomes would improve significantly. If the world economy were more stable, small businesses would grow without constant fear. If renewable energy sources were more affordable, many countries would switch to them immediately.
If public transport systems were more efficient, people would rely less on private vehicles. If human attention were less distracted by technology, productivity would increase naturally. If the air in this city were cleaner, people would live healthier lives. If my childhood neighborhood were still the same, I would visit it more often. If global leaders were more cooperative, many conflicts would be resolved peacefully. If this machine were more efficient, the production process would be much faster. If public awareness about mental health were higher, more people would seek help. If the internet connection in this area were more stable, online work would be easier. If the price of fuel were lower, transportation costs would decrease significantly. If the management team were more organized, the company would perform better. If the overall environment were more supportive, individuals would reach their full potential. If the global education system were more inclusive, students from all backgrounds would have equal opportunities. If the atmosphere in the workplace were more supportive, employees would feel more motivated. If the pace of modern life were slower, people would experience less stress. If advanced technology were more accessible, small communities would benefit significantly. If the leadership in that organization were more transparent, trust would increase naturally. If the quality of public health care were higher, fewer people would suffer from preventable diseases. If the design of this building were more efficient, energy consumption would decrease. If the cultural environment were more open-minded, creativity would flourish. If the transportation network were better developed, daily commuting would become easier. If the level of discipline in this institution were higher, overall performance would improve. If the availability of clean water were ensured everywhere, many health issues would disappear. If the communication between departments were clearer, misunderstandings would be reduced. If the investment in research were greater, innovation would accelerate rapidly. If the structure of this program were more flexible, more participants would benefit from it. If the level of awareness about environmental issues were higher, people would act more responsibly. If the planning process were more detailed, the results would be more predictable. If the overall atmosphere in the classroom were more engaging, students would participate actively. If the demand for sustainable solutions were stronger, industries would adapt quickly. If the standard of living in rural areas were improved, migration to cities would decrease. If the focus on long-term goals were stronger, individuals would make better decisions. If the quality of leadership in local institutions were stronger, communities would develop more sustainably. If the structure of the economy were more balanced, financial stability would increase significantly. If the level of digital literacy were higher, people would navigate technology more confidently. If the design of urban spaces were more human-centered, daily life would feel more comfortable. If the availability of skilled professionals were greater, industries would expand more rapidly. If the awareness of mental well-being were more widespread, society would become more compassionate. If the framework of this policy were more practical, its implementation would be more effective. If the overall mindset of the workforce were more growth-oriented, productivity would rise naturally. If the access to quality education in rural regions were improved, future opportunities would expand. If the commitment to ethical practices were stronger, organizations would build lasting trust. If the culture of continuous learning were more deeply embedded, individuals would adapt more effectively to change.